Today's scripture lesson is from Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. And this is the dynamic equivalence translation, it's a translation by our pastor. So here goes. Most of you know this one. So, one day while Jesus was standing by the Lake of Galilee, a crowd around him pressed in to hear him talk about God. He saw two boats at the shore of the lake. Fishermen were nearby washing their nets. Stepping into one of the boats, it belonged to Simon, he asked him to push it a little off the shore, and sitting in the boat, Jesus then taught the crowds. When he finished speaking, he suggested to Simon, "Take the boat a little further over deep water, cast your nets and catch some fish." "Teacher," Simon protested, "we worked all night and caught nothing, but if you say so, I will give it a try." And having done so, they caught so many fish that the nets were bursting. They had to call the other boat to help them, and both boats were so full that they were almost sinking. At that sight, Simon Peter fell on his knees, asking Jesus, "Leave me, Lord, for I am just a mere mortal." He and all around him, James and John Zebedee, were completely stunned at that catch. Then Jesus said to Simon, "From now on, you will be catching people." And bringing those boats to shore, they left fishing behind and followed him. Thanks be to God.
Thank you. And dear friends, today I will start with illustration. And I want to highlight the illustration we have on a bulletin cover, and just thinking that that might not be easily accessible to you, I will again try to share that on a screen. We will see again the icicles, but hopefully not for long. Here we go. That's an image on our bulletin cover. And it is a sculpture of two fishermen, or elderly men, but most likely fishermen, in Siglufjörður. And it is by artist Adelheider Istindóttir. And it is characteristic for that place because Singlefjorder, we visited several years ago during summer holidays, is a town in extreme north of Iceland, until recently cut off completely from the rest of the world. I will show you again. This is that village these days, and you can even ski there in summer. This is probably the end of summer. The snow is mostly gone, but we were there in July, and the mountains were covered with snow. And it's now not any longer a fishing village, or just minor fishing is happening. But in 1903, there were just few dozens of hardy people living there. And then the herring boom started. And that small village of 150 people experienced at the beginning of the 20th century exponential growth. And in just few decades, that town was bursting, and especially when there was a herring run, people from all over the world were coming to find work there and work in the fishing industry. It ended up of creating something like 20% of Icelandic export. And that Singlefjorder was called herring or Atlantic Klondike. It was just a beautiful place to be. It was smelly because herring industry is smelly, but they would say that you can smell money that way. In the 1950s, modern technology came, and with that, ever-growing catches. But then followed by some strange fluctuation of catches. Herrings were like being caught in this place where they're always been, but then they were not there, and they were caught a little further out. Similar, if not richer catches. But then, like out of the blue, in 1969, there were no more herrings. Zilch, nothing, and nothing for decades to come. This is called the fishery collapse. Herring depression is actually depicted on that sculpture. Those two elderly fishermen. One is holding a hand, almost like begging. And yes, Icelandic government, being a Scandinavian government, stepped in and tried to help and provide support, built infrastructure, connected that small village or town to the rest of Iceland by two very expensive tunnels. And the local industrious people, and yes, fishermen are industrious, they are able and willing and know how to make decisions for themselves. They reinvented themselves. They built a museum to herrings, and that collapsed so that people will remember and will learn from their bitter experience. And they built a marvelous tourist infrastructure. And I mentioned the skiing through summer. And they invested also into modern communication technology. But why I am telling you this, after hearing about calling of the fishermen, that could be like a small hint. But I'm telling it to you also so that you know that I am not using illustrations only from Hawaii. I can use illustrations from some other volcanic islands. But that's just a side note. I am telling this to you because I see there a very close connection with our Bible story today. And here I need to let you know a little bit about the Galilean fishing industry. Herod Antipas at that time was the ruler, tetrarch of that region. He was an ambitious son of Herod the Great. And after his father died, his realm was divided in between the remaining sons of this big king. And this Herod Antipas inherited the poorest part, the Galilee. And so he decided to do something about it and develop it. And he did a lot of good work there. And he decided also to develop that fishing industry on the Lake of Galilee, or Sea of Galilee, as it is often called. But it is actually a lake, medium-sized lake. And so Herod Antipas built a new capital next to the lake, Tiberias. He named that place after Roman Emperor Tiberius, new administration capital for entire Galilee. And next to that was another town called Magdala. And we know because it was dug by archaeologists, and they found that there was a profound fish industry for pickling and drying fish. And next to other towns we know about from the Bible, Capharnaum and Gennesaret were both along the shores, and all were thriving at this time. There are signs of boom, like in the Siglufjörður I mentioned. For instance, in Magdala, Tiberias had several synagogues, but even Magdala, which was just a fish processing town, there were 2 synagogues. And you might remember a few Sundays ago, I mentioned that there was no synagogue in Nazareth, or definitely not at this time. So Magdala, fish processing town, had 2 synagogues, or at least 2 we are aware of. But then, in Galilee, we see exorbitant, ruinous fees. All of that boom was built actually upon the fees and taxes forced upon fishermen, who were then pushed into overfishing, because if you are paying from your catch more than 70%, and some would say even up to 80% of proceeds, in order to survive, you need to catch more and more and more. And in the Gospels, we actually see the same thing like I described in Iceland, that fluctuation of catches. One day, nothing at all, then going slightly different place where there were no fish before, and then full nets. We know that that is an harbinger of the imminent collapse of fishery. And archaeology also contributes, because there are signs of decline in those villages. And also a boat, so-called Jesus boat, but probably not associated directly with Jesus or his disciples, but boat was discovered in a mud dating to roughly this time. And what a surprise, that boat was so badly repaired that it hardly was able to stay afloat. They were reusing old parts of other boats, clearly as signs of deep depression. In Iceland and in Galilee, greed and disrespect for nature led to ecological, environmental, and social disasters. And here we see that we need our governments to protect environment. We cannot do it just on our own, individually. Of course, that is important. But even more important is to force the government, which represents all of us, to do something about it. And for instance, to fix taxes so that they give financial incentives to protect nature and not to exploit that. We need to act early. We must not wait. That is the lesson from the Gospels. That is the lesson from Iceland. Siglufjörður fishermen were depressed, but also highly creative and industrious. Just like disciples. In Iceland, they were helped by their government. In Galilee, they took it to their own hands. They left that exploitative fishing business behind. But interestingly, and knowing it from other biblical stories, they did not leave behind their boats. Sometimes you can hear about that in some Christian songs, but that is not the fact. Because later on, we come across disciples taking Jesus on board and taking him from one side of a lake to another. they did not leave those boats behind. They used their sailing skills to provide security for their teacher and their master. In the boat, he was safe, as we read, as we heard. But he was safe not only from the pressing crowds, but also from being easily caught, captured by authorities, like it happened to John the Baptist. Even the guards or henchmen on horses could not follow him or them to a lake. If they were on a boat, just getting a little bit further, they were safe. Disciples were to be Jesus's security detail in that way. And interestingly, that might be possibly the background of that highly enigmatic catching or fishing people, logion or saying. In Gospel of Luke, in its Greek, you hear the verb Zogrell. That means, interestingly, catching alive. It can be used for fishing, but it is used for catching alive. And in Septuagint, we know its Semitic equivalent, the way these words were translated from one language to another. And interestingly, Zogreo is translating verb chayaya in Hebrew or Aramaic, that'll be the same root, in stems piel or hiphil, causative forms. And it means to keep alive. So you can sort of say that you will be fishermen of people, or men can actually be heard by those who heard it first. You will be keeping people, or me, alive. It is a wordplay in an Aramaic or Hebrew, and somehow it is being also preserved in Luke's Greek. Unfortunately, it is lost in all other translations known to me. And other Gospels have slightly different wordplay there. They are using really, like fishing or halieo. But that is also, interestingly, not directly fishing. It is used from sailing and fishing in Greek. And it can also mean being sailors of people. So again, providing protection, being a security detail. And that's what we know did for Jesus in Galilee. I mentioned those other stories. Some of them are really dramatic, and people focus on that miracle of Jesus walking over the stormy sea or calming the sea. But in between the lines, you can see that they are constantly traveling by those boats, where they were safe from those who would otherwise capture them on the land. So they provided that protection to Jesus, these fishermen, until Jesus left Galilee and went to Jerusalem. They did not have that protection there. And I would say how I would make it for us, what it would be the meaning of it for us. I think that we can all hear that call to use our boats. Of course, we don't have, or almost no one. I'm not aware, maybe one person in our church having a boat here on Hudson, sailing boat. But using those boats as our skills, our talents, our voices to protect Jesus from being abused, from being turned into what Jesus never was. And one thing which comes to my mind is the peddler of eternal life, the one who is promising pie in the sky. Just keep up with whatever comes to your way, because there'll be an heavenly reward from God after you die. That is not what is in the Gospels. That's not there. There is that longing for justice already here. Of course, there is a knowledge of divine justice which is larger than this life. But it must not be transferred only into this pie in the sky pseudo-myth, I would say. With that comes another aberration of prosperity gospel, saying that gospel is here just to make you rich. Give me money and God will make you rich. That's a similarly dangerous aberration of Jesus's message. Jesus never preached that. He was upset with people being poor, don't get me wrong, but it was not individualistic. It was always thinking of communities, and especially those who were worst off. But we can continue where Jesus needs to be protected most recently, and I mentioned that in my report, oral report to the annual congregational meeting, where Jesus is being turned into an anti-science hero or anti-vax miracle maker. Yes, friends, there were comments on our YouTube from people from outside of our community who came and watched our worship on YouTube, and they noticed when we were back in the sanctuary that we were wearing masks, and they took an offense saying, "You don't believe to God if you are wearing masks." This is what I mean. Turning Jesus or turning faith, turning God into this anti-science, anti-vaccination miracle maker who is requesting, demanding this kind of silly sacrifices, dangerous behavior. I'm convinced that that is putting God to test. That is one of those temptations of Christ by devil. And Jesus said, "You will not test God. Go away." Because we were given our brains, our knowledge, our science to use it to benefit us and benefit people around us. That is a good divine gift. And finally, Jesus needs our protection against those who are turning him into an armed and violent white Christian nationalist. Just yesterday, I saw something which just stopped me and offended me. There was a clip of Steve Bannon threatening the prior vice president because he did not overturn the election on January 6th. And he threatened him for doing that, or for not doing it. Threatened him, saying that it will follow him to his grave. Pretty scary threat. But right behind this ugly person was a shelf with a display of religious paraphernalia. I cannot call it another way. Yes, there was Most Sacred Heart of Jesus painting or copy of a painting. I did a little bit of research. It's by Norman Rockwell, the one of that blue-eyed, white-skinned, blonde Jesus. This is slightly different, but it is of the same group. Probably bought from Walmart. Next to it was Maria Immaculata. And in front of them, those two paintings, that's a Baroque painting, again, copy. And in front of them was a Celtic cross, which had been for a very long time turned now into a symbol of a clan. And I am really upset. I'm upset with this abuse of religion. And even that kind of sleazy abuse by using things from Walmart to look folksy. A person who we know is extremely rich is using it to sleaze into the minds of people, saying, I am like you, down in South Dakota or somewhere, or in upstate New York or anywhere. I am like you, and I am pious. And this mixture of Scottish faith and Baroque Catholic faith, and all of that is just driving me nuts. I'm sorry that I'm using this word in the sermon. And this is something we need. And I am right now screaming out and saying, no, this is not Jesus. Jesus here needs to be protected. That's our duty. Like those apostles being called and recognizing that they have a place in that ministry. And that is our part of that ministry, to represent what Jesus really meant. Care for those who are vulnerable, welcoming strangers, including refugees, and building communities which are not atomized, which are not angry, which are loving and caring, and carrying Jesus's message forward, allowing God to address injustices of our world. Like Presbyterians, doing it decently and in order.